It's January 1965. Inside a NASCAR garage, the air smells like gasoline, burnt rubber, and something else. Fear. Because Ford has just shown up with an engine that nobody was prepared for. Not Chrysler, not Chevrolet, not even NASCAR itself. A 427 cubic inch monster with overhead camshafts. And what happened next didn't just shake racing, it almost rewrote the rules of American motorsport forever. But what almost nobody knows is the real story behind Ford's 427 SOHC Cammer engine isn't about winning races. It's about why it was never allowed to try. Most people think they know this story. They don't. Because in the early 1960s, Ford had a problem: Chrysler's HEMI. At the 1964 Daytona 500, the HEMI-powered cars absolutely dominated. Richard Petty qualified at over 174 minatsami. Lap after lap, those hemispherical combustion chambers were breathing like jet engines. Massive valves, better airflow, sky-high RPM capability. The race wasn't even close. Plymouth and Dodge swept the top positions. Ford's teams watched from the pits, frustrated and helpless, as Chrysler's engineering superiority became painfully obvious to everyone watching. Corporate executives back in Dearborn were furious. Ford's answer at the time was the FE427. With a 4.23-inch bore and a 3.78-inch stroke, it displaced exactly 425.98 cubic inches. Running a 12.5.1 compression ratio in race trim, it could produce around 500 horsepower. The FE block had been around since 1958. It was a workhorse, reliable, strong, proven. On paper, that should have been enough. It wasn't, because the HEMI could rev higher, breathe deeper, and more importantly, survive longer at full throttle. At sustained 6,800 RPM on the high banks of Daytona, the HEMI just kept pulling. Consistent, powerful, relentless. Meanwhile, Ford's engines were falling apart. Ford engineers started tearing down blown race engines after Daytona, and what they found was ugly: bearings wiped out, cam lobes scarred, metal flakes floating in the oil like glitter, valve springs broken in half, push rods bent like pretzels, lifters literally disintegrating under load. At 6,800 to 7,000 RPM sustained speeds, the pushrod valve train simply couldn't keep up. Valve float was destroying everything. Oil pressure dropped, lifters collapsed, rocker arms flexed. The engine wasn't just losing races, it was eating itself alive. And the worst part? There was no easy fix. You could strengthen the push rods, but that added weight. Heavier valve train components meant higher inertia. Higher inertia meant even worse valve float at high RPM. It was a vicious cycle, so Ford asked a terrifying question. What if we built something completely different? Instead of fighting the HEMI with a better pushrod engine, what if they built something closer to a European Grand Prix motor? Something that didn't rely on pushrods at all. That's when engineer Bill Gay and his team had an idea that sounded insane. Take the existing FE427 block and bolt on a set of single overhead cam cylinder heads. No pushrods, no lifters, just a massive timing chain driving one camshaft per bank directly from the crankshaft. The proposal landed on desks at Ford's Dearborn headquarters like a bomb. Some executives thought it was brilliant. Others thought it was corporate suicide. "We're an American car company," one reportedly said. "We don't build European race engines." But the racing division didn't care about tradition, they cared about winning. Now here's where it gets wild. To make it work, Ford designed a 6-foot-long timing chain system with an additional idler gear to keep everything synchronized. The camshafts sat high above the combustion chambers, operating huge 2.25-inch intake valves and 1.90-inch exhaust valves, way bigger than anything in the pushrod FE. The intake valves alone were massive. For comparison, the standard FE427 ran 2.09-inch intake valves. The Cammer's 2.25-inch valves increased flow area dramatically, and because the cams were directly above the valves, there was almost no flex in the system, no long push rods bending, no rocker arms deflecting, just direct, precise valve control. Suddenly, airflow improved dramatically. At 7,000 RPM, this thing wasn't gasping for air anymore. It was inhaling it. Dyno tests showed flow numbers that made the standard FE look like it was breathing through a straw. But there was a problem. Actually, several. Early test engines started experiencing timing chain whip at high RPM. At around 7,200 RPM, the long chain would begin oscillating. Cam timing would drift. Valve events became unpredictable. One engineer reportedly said, "It sounded like the cams were arguing with the crankshaft." That kind of instability would destroy pistons. Valves would crash into piston tops. Connecting rods would punch through the block. Engineers tried different chain designs, different tensioner locations, different sprocket configurations. Nothing worked consistently. That kind of instability would destroy pistons. So Ford added a spring-loaded tensioner system to stabilize the chain, multiple tensioners actually, one on each bank, carefully positioned to dampen oscillations without creating excessive friction. And then they did something even more radical. They switched from solid lifters to direct bucket tappets. Now the cams were pressing directly onto followers sitting over the valves. No rocker arms, no push rods, almost nothing to flex or deflect under load. The cam lobes were ground with aggressive profiles. High lift, long duration, designed to keep the valves open longer and let the engine breathe at stratospheric RPM. Suddenly, the engine could rev safely past 7,500 RPM. And at those speeds, with that kind of airflow, you can probably guess what happened next. Horsepower exploded. With a single 4-barrel carburetor, the street version was conservatively rated at 616 horsepower at 6,800 RPM. Torque came in at around 515 lb-ft. Those were the official numbers, the ones Ford put on paper for homologation. But in race trim, dual Holley 4 barrels, open headers, high lift cam profiles, compression ratios pushing 13.1 and higher. Engineers were seeing numbers as high as 657 horsepower. Some dyno tests quietly pushed past 700. In 1965, from a naturally aspirated V8. Let that sink in for a moment. In an era when most production V8s struggled to make 400 horsepower, Ford had just built a street-legal engine making nearly double that. That kind of power didn't just win races, it shattered transmissions. Early test cars kept breaking driveline components. Clutches exploded, ring gears stripped teeth, universal joints snapped like twigs. Ford had to redesign the entire drivetrain just to handle the abuse. Drag tests showed Cammer-powered cars running the quarter mile in the low 11-second range at over 125 mph, naturally aspirated, and then dipping into the 9s once superchargers entered the picture. Street racers who got their hands on Cammer engines became legends overnight. One story tells of a Fairlane running mid-10s on pump gas with street tires and full exhaust. Another describes a Galaxy that ran 980 at over 140 mph with a mild blower setup. These weren't stripped-down race cars. These were street machines. But Ford didn't build the Cammer for drag racing. They built it for NASCAR. And that's where everything went wrong. Because when NASCAR officials saw what Ford was planning to homologate, they panicked. The rules required at least 500 production units for approval. Ford planned to build them. They even priced them at around $2,350 per engine for teams and private buyers. Parts catalogs were printed, production schedules were drawn up, everything was ready. But NASCAR made a sudden decision. Single overhead cam engines would now be banned from competition. Overnight, no vote, no delay, no discussion, just gone. Officially, they claimed it wasn't a stock-based design. The overhead cam configuration was too exotic for stock car racing. It violated the spirit of the rules, they said. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. The Cammer would have made the HEMI obsolete. Chrysler had just invested millions into HEMI development. If NASCAR allowed the Cammer, Chrysler would have been forced to respond. An engineering arms race would have spiraled out of control. Costs would skyrocket. Smaller teams couldn't compete. The entire sport could collapse. At least, that's what NASCAR said. But many believed the real reason was simpler: politics. Chrysler had powerful friends in NASCAR's leadership, and Ford's dominance would threaten the competitive balance that kept fans interested. And Ford had just spent millions developing an engine that now had nowhere to race. The racing division was furious. Engineers felt betrayed. All that development, all those dyno hours, all those innovations, wasted. Or did it? Because there was one place that didn't care about overhead cams: NHRA drag racing. And when the Cammer showed up at the strip in 1966, things got violent. Top fuel teams began bolting massive superchargers onto the 427 SOHC. With forged internals and strengthened bottom ends, boost pressures climbed past 30 psi. Some radical setups pushed 40 psi. Horsepower numbers skyrocketed past 1,000, then 2,500, eventually pushing over 2,000 horsepower in extreme configurations. Blowers the size of truck engines sat on top of custom intake manifolds. Fuel consumption at full throttle reached absurd levels. Some cars burned nearly a gallon per second during a pass. One run reportedly clocked a quarter mile at 790 seconds. At over 185 mph in the mid-1960s, crowds gathered just to hear them fire up. The sound was unlike anything else, a deep mechanical howl that shook the grandstands. Engines were tearing themselves apart after just a few passes. Blocks cracked. Rods flew through the oil pan. Cylinder heads lifted off despite massive studs holding them down. But when they held together, nothing could touch them. Cammer-powered dragsters dominated their classes. They set records. They won championships. Drivers spoke of the engine with a mix of awe and terror. The power was intoxicating, but one mistake, one mechanical failure at 180 mph could be fatal. But even that success wouldn't last forever. By the early 1970s, new regulations and changing technology began phasing out the big SOHC monster. The rise of the 426 HEMI in top fuel, now supercharged and refined, brought the fight full circle. Chrysler's engineers had learned from the Cammer. They improved oiling systems, strengthened bottom ends, developed better supercharger setups. The HEMI fought back. Meanwhile, the world was changing. Insurance rates were climbing, emissions laws were tightening, the muscle car era was ending, and Ford quietly stopped producing Cammer engines after building only a few hundred units. Some estimates say around 657 were built total. Others claim fewer than 500. Ford's records are incomplete. Tooling was shelved, programs were canceled, and one of the most advanced American V8 engines ever built simply disappeared. Most ended up in the hands of hardcore racers and collectors. A few went to private buyers who wanted the ultimate street engine. Some were destroyed on the drag strip. Others were lost to time. Today, surviving 427 SOHC engines are worth well over $100,000. Some complete race-prepped units have sold for more than $200,000 at auction. Original factory parts are nearly impossible to find. Timing chains, cam followers, even valve covers command premium prices. Because the Cammer wasn't just powerful, it was forbidden. The engine that was too good to race, too advanced for its time, too threatening to the status quo. A 4.23-inch bore, a 3.78-inch stroke, 427 cubic inches of cast iron rebellion, running overhead cams at a time when Detroit barely trusted pushrods. It proved that American engineers could build exotic high-revving power plants just as well as the Europeans. It showed that innovation could come from Dearborn, not just from Maranello or Stuttgart. It didn't win Daytona. It never got the chance. But it changed everything anyway. It forced Chrysler to improve the HEMI. It pushed Chevrolet to develop better big blocks. It showed an entire generation of engineers that overhead cams weren't just for sports cars. The lessons learned from the Cammer influenced Ford's later performance engines, the Boss 429, the Cleveland 351, even modern modular engines trace some lineage back to those experiments in 1965. And in the shadows of drag strips and private collections, the legend grew. The engine that NASCAR feared. The engine that was never supposed to exist. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments what you want to see next. Another rivalry, another banned engine, or another piece of racing history that almost rewrote the rule book. Was it Chrysler's Street HEMI that changed muscle cars forever? The Chevy ZL1 all-aluminum 427 that almost nobody bought? Or maybe the legend of Smokey Yunick and the engines that bent every rule without breaking them? And make sure to subscribe, because the next story might be even crazier.